Hey, good afternoon, everybody. John here, and hope all is going all right for you all. I had a good weekend. I spent a lot of time driving. I think I mentioned that I went back to my law school reunion in Kansas, so I drove Friday, spent Friday night, all day Saturday there, and drove back Sunday morning. So quite a bit of driving from Denver to there in northeastern Kansas. So anyways, hope everyone's doing well. I appreciate all the discussion this week. I think I mentioned in the past the 2 weeks ago we had the HIPAA discussion question, which is I think it's my favorite because it really forces you to think about legal analysis in incorporating the rule, the definition of breach in this case, into that analysis and how that affects the analysis and how you apply the facts to the rule and come out to your conclusion. I apologize if the video it seems like it goes light and dark all of a sudden. Anyways, that's the way it appears to me. So hopefully that's not too distracting. The discussion this past week, I was writing that letter, the demand letter related to the employment issues. I don't necessarily consider that a healthcare question. It's more of an employment law question. In your, in your initial post, you're referencing laws that sort of fit within that bucket of employment, labor and employment laws, not necessarily healthcare laws. So I am definitely not an expert in any of those laws that were cited in the discussion questions this week. But regardless, I mean, to me, that shows two different things. Number one, in the healthcare setting, it's not just about healthcare laws. I mean, there are so many different types of laws that are referenced, that are implicated, that could potentially be implicated in the healthcare setting, including this type of law. So that's one piece. The second piece is just this whole concept of analysis that we've been sort of we've been really trying to emphasize throughout the last several weeks. You've got your facts that were given to you in the discussion question. You've got your rules. It's sort of this: what is the issue? What is the rule? Apply the specific facts to that rule to come out to your conclusion. In this case, is more of an advocacy conclusion. You're taking on that advocacy role for your client, but you're still coming to a conclusion, or at least trying to persuade the other side that conclusion is correct, and then make your demand. So it's really that same thing that we're that same pattern of analysis that we're really trying to emphasize in the discussion questions, but more particularly the assignments. So anyways, I appreciate that. Appreciate the discussion there. This week, I'm going to talk about a couple things. Some of the reading material in Chapter 11 and Appendix A of your text. Two things in particular. First, clinical trials, and the second, I want to touch on a little bit about ethics. But with respect to clinical trials, a clinical trial is really just one step in the drug development process, which is really, really highly regulated by the FDA. I occasionally do some stuff in the clinical trial space. Maybe about a year ago, helped a client. It was a multi-specialty medical group that had a clinical study component in a couple of their jurisdictions, a couple of their states where they existed. And the investigation was regarding potential improprieties related to this informed consent process. If you have ever dealt with, or you currently are involved in the clinical trial space, you'll know that the informed consent process is the keystone to to proper and compliant clinical research studies. There are all kinds of different FDA and other rules, regulations, published guidance, accepted standard practices for clinical research related to informed consent. Why is it highly regulated? Well, because there's potentially significant risk to patient subjects. And so anytime, I mean, there all the regulations and the rules related to that are really uh, protective, designed to be protective of these patients. And so, you've got like FDA rules, you've got ICH guidelines, you've got IRB, Institutional Review Board rules. All of it is subject to this third party independent body called the Institutional Review Board, that monitors essentially the clinical study itself. Um, but if you're involved in clinical studies, or you have been in the past, you'll know that informed consent really starts with the advertising and the marketing of the study itself. And so, how do you market that? All the marketing materials should be approved by the IRB. How do you advertise? How do you recruit patients? And how do you explain, both verbally and in writing, the risks, the potential benefits, total transparency in terms of the study and what they'll be taking and the treatment they'll be receiving. I'm going to post this in the announcement this week, but there's a really great website, really great page on the FDA website that goes into further information on the whole drug development process, not just the clinical trial piece, but it's fda.gov/for-patients/approval/drugs. So, but I'll post that, and you can click on that link, and if you're interested, just take a look. So, bottom line, there's serious ethical issues regarding clinical research, which is why the informed consent process is so critical and so highly regulated. And there's so much information that's published on it, and subject to so much FDA scrutiny, IRB scrutiny, and by basically all governing bodies over this sort of process, really hone in on that informed consent process. So there's that piece. I know we don't really spend a lot of time on it, but there's, in these discussions that we've had the last several weeks, I'll occasionally bring up stuff that we don't really spend a lot of time in class, because I just think hopefully it adds value and some context to some of the other things that we discuss. Now, with respect to ethics, I think you've seen in the last we're in module 6, last 5 modules we've really largely, other than some introductory assignments at the beginning, largely been dealing with the legal component of the assignment that we're working on. Now we're getting into the ethical piece, and then at the end we'll bring it all together as we analyze that entire case. So when I think about ethics, I break down ethics into 2 different components. There's societal ethics. There are things that we as a society, we've all agreed are unethical, and things like murdering people or stealing things, or a variety of other things that we just, as a society, we've said we can't function as a normal society and allow these sorts of actions or activities. And so because those ethics that we as a society have agreed on has led to the enactment of laws that are based on those ethical values, and to the extent that those ethical values hold, really then just is conditioned or contingent on how we enforce those laws that we've codified. The rule of law will essentially be the marker in terms of how we as a society really want to enforce those ethical values. The second component for me are more the individual ethics, and so these individual ethics are based on our personal beliefs. They're based on how we were raised, what we were taught, our faith, our religion, sort of just the opinions that we've developed over time. And these are things like, it could be a variety of things: life support, end of life issues, euthanasia, the death with dignity, the death with dignity laws that are have been enacted in some states, and continue to be an issue in other states. Abortion, healthcare as being an entitlement, a right, or not. Those are all we may. I think most people have an opinion one way or the other on all these things, but those are very much individual ethical issues. Things like you may recall earlier in the course we had that assignment on rationing a limited supply of vaccines, and how do you distribute a limited supply among people through the lens of a bunch of different ethical theories and principles. And so a lot of that is just going to depend on which ethical theory we would apply personally. I know that one asks you to look at it through a few different ethical theories, but what ethical theory we would use in distributing a limited supply really depends on a lot of those things. How do we individually see that? How do we feel like that limited supply should be distributed based on our own ethics? Euthanasia is an interesting one that's been in the news over the last several, I don't know how many years, but fairly recent. Oregon, I think, was one of the first states, if not the first state, to pass what they call this death with dignity law, and then we'll be looking at in the discussion question upcoming. I don't think it's this week, maybe next week. It's either discussion question or assignment, I don't recall, but we'll be looking at that at a specific case that was in the news up in Oregon. Colorado has a similar law, and there are a lot of controls behind it in terms of what can and can't be done, what condition the patient has to be in, and so on. But it's very much a hot ethical issue. And regardless how we think about this, they're all things to think about and consider as we think about our own personal ethical values in the healthcare environment. And so I think it's good to kind of reflect on, as we engage in this discussion. Obviously, it's important to be respectful, but it's good. It's a good opportunity for us to reflect on, what are our own ethical values? How do we see these things, one way or the other? And be able to express that opinion in a respectful manner. So that's all I have. I guess two things I want to point out as we move forward in the upcoming assignments. So like I said, we're looking at the iTraldi case, the ethical component. We've already done the legal component. When you're looking at the ethical components, much like we've discussed breaking down on the legal side, we've discussed breaking down the legal component, the cause of action, into its individual elements, analyzing each individual element in this Iraq sort of legal analysis pattern, because, as I've said to several of you, that's important, because if one of those elements is missing, there is no negligence. Negligence doesn't occur by a single action. Negligence is a legal term of art that is comprised of these four elements, and so you have to state the rule and apply specific facts that support or that can be applied to that rule, and then come to your conclusion. That has to be done with each one of these elements. So on the ethical side, you don't really have a cause of action. You don't have a negligence, but you do have theories and principles that we've discussed. And so I think it very similarly, you can apply specific facts to those various theories or principles as you deem appropriate based on your analysis. So that's one thing I wanted to think about. The assignment this past week that I've graded, I guess the one I just finished grading this weekend, that asks you to look at the different elements of a particular scenario, cause of action, negligence for this particular scenario. Collectively, great job. I think just about most of you, pretty close to all of you, took that and broke out the issue by the respective elements of negligence. The duty. Remember, the duty is not necessarily, it doesn't necessarily have anything to do with proper care. When you're establishing duty, you can go back to your text and look at that rule. The duty is established when the physician-patient relationship is established. Once that's established, there's some sort of duty. I may be paraphrasing the actual rule as it's stated in your text, but it's basically more or less that. So when does that occur? And what fact in the case supports when that occurred? And so it's, there's the rule, duty rule. Here's the fact. Here's my conclusion. There is a duty. Move on to the next element. They go on to breach, which is really an analysis of the duty of breach, standard of care, and then move on to causation and the damages. Those are the four elements of a negligence claim. And so just about all of you went through that analysis in this last assignment. For the legal component section of the Itraldi project, that case, use that similar sort of format, similar sort of analysis when looking at the legal components, at least the negligence part, right? So there may be some other legal issues or legal components to discuss, particularly related to the hospital. But anyways, I just employ that same sort of analysis in the legal components section of the Itraldi case, and most of you did. A lot of you did. So I just want to bring that up, because you all did a really great job doing it for this last assignment. So just transfer that over to make sure you transfer that over, if you haven't, to the legal component section of the Itraldi case. So that's all I have. I am around all week. Please feel free to reach out to me. Text, call, email, whatever is most convenient for you, and we can talk through any questions or discuss anything you want. So hope you have a great week, and we will talk to you later. Thanks. Bye.